But how do we end this? There's really only one way to end this, which is with Professor George Shirley, who was actually gone all week. He was in New York judging competitions, and but we managed to bring him from the airport to get him here in time to just make some closing remarks. And we'll certainly have time for a few questions. And I may take the opportunity to ask the first one. We'll see. But if you don't know George, I don't know where you've been. Because he's a legend, really all around the university, Ann Arbor certainly as a city, and the world. He, I think, was born in, is it Indianapolis, Indiana, is that right? And then came to Detroit as a youngster, trained in music there, and was then drafted into the Army, where he became the first African-American member of the U.S. Army Chorus. Came back to Detroit, becoming the first African-American music teacher in the Detroit high school system, and then just got carted off by the Metropolitan to become the first tenor to take on a leading role as on the stage in New York. So he is a pioneer, but I've said, has never lost sight of his roots here in Detroit. He's an incredible advocate for education. There's a vocal prize named after him and a whole range of supporters here in Ann Arbor and across the globe who love George Shirley. So I'd just like to invite you to come up, George, and make some closing remarks for us today. Yeah.
Thank you very much, Mark. Thanks a lot. The paycheck will be in. Good afternoon, everyone. Sorry I wasn't here for the whole run of this really exciting event, but I've judged the George London competition in New York for about 10 years, and having sung with the great George London, friends with his widow, this is something that I look forward to doing. It's a way of helping young singers, because first prize is $10,000, and there were 5 $10,000 prizes and 3 $5,000 prizes and about 10 other $1,000 prizes. So I'm really happy to be able to have a part in giving that kind of money to young people who are seeking careers. I'm going to start, I wrote out some things, but I'm going to start with an anecdote from my own experience. A number of years ago, it was back in the 70s, I think, my manager, Ann Summers, told me she had opened an office in Rome. She married, second marriage to an Italian, and she opened an office there, and at one point she decided that she wanted to bring the Metropolitan Opera to La Scala to perform. She said, I went in and I had a conversation with Ghiringhelli, who was the general director of La Scala at that time. And he said, Signora, you want to bring the Metropolitan Opera to perform here? So what are they going to perform for us? If I want Manon, Carmen, I bring l'Opéra from Paris. If I want Flying Dutchman, I bring Deutsche Oper. The only thing that the Metropolitan Opera can sing here in La Scala is Porgy and Bess. So, forward. Now, as we conclude this stimulating week of exploration of the cultural impact of Porgy and Bess, let's consider the fact that operas based on Black life, written by composers other than George Gershwin, composers both Black and white, have failed thus far to capture little of the ground occupied for some 8 decades by Gershwin's masterpiece, a fact that includes all operas based on American life, in general, written by anyone. Why is this so? One might argue that operas written by blacks have not been given due consideration as works of value because of their authorship. Always a possibility. Or that the music or storyline of a particular work is not of a quality that excites interest or speaks profoundly to the human condition. Again, always a possibility for all composers of any given ethnicity. Porgy gives the lie to any theory that would suggest black life to be of no theatrical interest, but begs the question, what aspects of black life will fill the theater? The answer must needs be the same aspects that define white, brown, red, and yellow life, aspects peculiar to the human animal, ethnic origin notwithstanding. Cavalleria Rusticana and I Pagliacci, two of the most beloved verismo operas in the repertoire, focus on the dark side of Italian life, as do Tosca and Il Tabarro. Alban Berg's Lulu and Wozzeck, William Baucham's A View from the Bridge, and MacTeague, and Carlisle Floyd's Susanna each reveal blemishes in white life shared by mortals of German, Irish, and Scots-Irish ethnicity. Yet, these imperfections are not the only examples of white life in the operatic canon, serving as exemplars of behavioral traits that can tend to define those particular ethnic groups in minds prone to naivete, bias, and intolerance. For there are considerable antidotes in the repertoire that serve as antipodes, presenting more respectable attributes of whites, while few, if any, operas championing positive images of black society have found equal place in the sun. The answer, then, is to create operatic works that, through musical scores and librettos as powerful and gripping as those of great works of the past, will embody the positive and uplifting aspects of the black experience in a manner that rivals Porgy and Bess. The negative images of blacks in Porgy bother me much less than those representations of black life I hear and see in media today. But then I have to ask myself, to what extent do these images reflect reality? Which leads to the next question. What is the value of theater if it is devoid of a meaningful reflection of reality? I grew up in Detroit, surrounded by characters like Sport and Life, Crown, Bess, and Porgy. They were real and lived their lives as best they knew how. I also grew up embraced by characters who were loving, honest, principled, and morally strong. Until we see more of these souls presented with strength and dignity in presentations upon the lyric stage, the picture will remain unbalanced. We worry about appropriation. I'm sure that that's something that was discussed over this week. Appropriation, either illegally or legally, taking something created by someone else and making capital of it without asking permission or paying for it or giving due credit as we master or create from it something new. Copyright laws exist to protect creative property to an extent, but it is impossible to prevent human beings from emulating what appeals to them. Blacks didn't invent basketball, football, or baseball, and were indeed prevented from playing these sports professionally for decades because they were seen as white sports reserved for white players. Today, blacks have appropriated these games to everyone's delight except possibly those who still feel we have no right to play them because they did not spring from black initiative. Jazz was born of the experience of black musicians working in the brothels of the South, the seamy side of American society. We appropriated Western musical instruments and imposed our own rhythmic and harmonic rules upon Western musical forms and created music that is purely American. White musicians emulated the improvised sounds and rhythms that poured from the bells of cornets, the bowels of pianos, and the reeds of clarinets and saxophones, and drum skins, and capitalized on it, oftentimes earning more income than the musicians who gave it birth. Not because they were better performers, necessarily, but because they held the unfair advantage of being white. We singers and instrumentalists who have appropriated the music of European composers and have performed successfully in opera houses and concert halls worldwide have pursued the path that human beings naturally follow. We see or hear something for which we have an affinity, and we are drawn to it no matter its origin. If it speaks to us as a way of life, we have no reason not to pursue it. Music is like that. Music belongs to no one person or ethnic entity. It belongs to anyone who can understand it and can develop the ability to perform it with interpretative integrity and profound respect. I have no right to tell anyone they cannot perform the music of black folk if they have the desire and ability to do so with reverence and with respect. No one has the right to tell me that I cannot perform the compositions of Western Europe or the Middle East or Asia or Africa if I have the desire and ability to do so with reverence and respect for these diverse musical languages. So, in light of my statement, what of the restriction placed by the Gershwins limiting the performance of roles in Porgy and Bess to black singers? When the restriction was put in place in, I think, 1935, black singers in America were prevented from singing with established opera companies because segregation was the law of the land, and because opera and classical music were considered to be amongst the whitest of art forms. The restriction has ensured that, at least in North America, singers of color have access to an operatic platform that has stood the test of time and continues to be the most popular American opera ever written. They have access to a paycheck earned doing what they were born to do. Early in my career, I was already singing at the Metropolitan Opera, and I was asked by Nathaniel Merrill, who was the resident director, if I would consider doing Sport in Life in a production he was going to stage during the summer somewhere. And I refused because I knew the history of black singers, in particular black males. And I'll expand on that a bit. I wanted, at that time, to be recognized as someone who could sing Puccini and Verdi and Strauss and Schubert and Schumann. There was a wonderful cartoon by a black cartoonist named Ollie Harrington that appeared about the time that segregation was beginning to change. And in it, it was apparently at a university, and it was a room, you could see the clock tower outside the window, a long table, and around the table was seated a number of white gentlemen, and at the top of the table there was a black gentleman standing with a sheaf of papers in his hand. And this was a committee, evidently, of some sort, and the chairman of the committee seated at the table said, now, Professor Brown, before you deliver your paper on the effects of gamma rays on blah, 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 and such and such and such, how about a good old spiritual? Oh my God. Well, I sort of wanted to avoid that if I could, as I tried to establish a career as a singer of operatic literature. So I didn't sing Sport and Life until I was in my late 60s in Bregenz, in a very controversial setting, a bridge underneath in San Francisco. Everybody was living under this bridge after the time of the earthquake. And this was Götz Friedrich's conception, Deutsche Oper. And he initially asked me if I would do the role of Daddy Peter, and I said, no, but I'd like to do Sport and Life. So he said, okay. And so he went to the artistic direction of the festival. And he told me later, he said that when he presented me as possibility of Sport and Life, that the artistic director said, aber dieser Mensch ist zu alt. This man is too old. So there I was facing another barrier that I had nothing to do with. I mean, I didn't ask. I'm grateful I am too old, but I didn't ask for that any more than I asked for. Anyway, but it turned out to be one of the most thrilling and spiritually satisfying experiences of my entire career. Hearing people speak about the feeling of family. And I've sung in a lot of opera houses, but I've never had that feeling of family. I could relate with the characters in this opera, the way, in a sense, I can relate to the Duke of Mantua or to Rodolfo in La Bohème, but not quite the same thing, if you know what I mean. It was an experience that I will always treasure. And now that I am really probably too out to sing, I'd love to sing the role again. I'll see if I can do something to Chauncey Packer tonight to sort of... But anyway. For many black singers, too many black singers over the decades, Porgy has been the only operatic experience available to them when other possibilities for which they were as well qualified as some of their white counterparts were not forthcoming. The restriction was felt not exclusively, but especially by black male singers. A former student of mine left a solo position. It benefited, but the results were that the restriction for black males to be hired to do other roles after they had sung Porgy successfully, it wasn't happening. A former student of mine left a solo position with the United States Army Chorus and sang over 2,000 performances of the role of Porgy internationally for 7 years, but returned to the Army because he could not make a living given the relatively meager pay scale for the tours, and because he was unsuccessful in receiving contracts to perform other bass roles for which he was qualified. The role of Porgy is one of the most demanding roles in the entire canon. If ever you saw the late William Warfield in his later years, he was crippled. He walked, one foot was turned in, and I believe that greatly was because of the fact that he spent so many hours on his knees singing the role of Porgy. To think that a seasoned Porgy could not find employment as, say, Collina in La Boheme, or Tom or Sam in Ballo in Maschera, or Rocco in Fidelio, stretches credulity. It is a well-known fact that success achieved in Porgy and Bess is no guarantee of an offer to perform anything else, even in the opera house where you have achieved success in performing Porgy. So I wasn't about to take the chance, even though I was singing at the Metropolitan, because I knew I could do a hell of a good sport in life. I didn't want to take the chance on people saying, oh, yeah, okay, fine. And then when it came to Tamino or Belmonte, say, well, you know, I had a wife and baby to take care of, and I was sort of enjoying what I was doing, and I wanted to be able to continue doing that. As long as such injustice remains, I will support retention of the restriction. When a singer of color can receive serious consideration for a leading role in a professional production of an opera about, say, the Italian family in A View from the Bridge, or Little Women, or in any work that focuses on life in a particular ethnic community that isn't black, then, and only then, would I support lifting the restriction, because then we will have reached that utopia wherein casting has only to do with vocal quality and interpretative expertise. I don't know if we'll ever get there, but until that happens, for me, the restriction stays in place. American history is filled with the stuff of operatic appeal and greatness. And it is incumbent upon our composers and poets, no matter their ethnicity, and I use ethnicity in place of race because I believe there's only one race, and that's human, no matter their ethnicity, to bring these works to birth. American history is nothing if not operatic. Operas that reflect truth, impossible to do without stirring controversy. Operas that give everyone, black, white, Asian, Hispanic, American Indian, Muslim, the opportunity to play winner or loser, hero or villain, as in life itself. And when we can have our place in the sun, the negative representations that gall us in characters like Monostatos, Porgy, Bess, Crown, and Sport and Life, they will be balanced by characters whose lives represent qualities worthy of emulation and respect. Verismo, a reality show presented with a touch of class. Thank you.